Welcome to the new year. I'm so excited for 2024 because I don't know about you, but 2023 has definitely been not exactly as I planned. I started off 2023 with these big vision boards, and I just kind of put post-it notes all over the rooms, and I wrote down everything that I wanted to accomplish and how I wanted to accomplish it, and with the idea that I was just going to be more organized. And like most New Year's resolutions, by February, quite literally, almost all of that was thrown out the window. Now, part of it was my fault, and part of it wasn't necessarily my fault because where I am today was definitely a slow process. Okay. And I needed to go through definitely that visionary, that strategic outlining to get the push I needed to kind of line up where I'm going to be today. So I am starting this YouTube series, which was actually on my 2023 list of things I wanted to execute. I wanted to start doing YouTube videos. I wanted to be more regular with my engagement and create more content more consistently, providing more tips and value out there on the internet, on the online world, in social media, and all these different places. And when it came down to it, it just didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a variety of reasons. One of which, because I call 2023 a little bit of the year of the identity crisis. And you may be wondering, what does that exactly mean? And I wasn't sure if I was going to share any of these details with y'all or not, but I feel like it is the right time to do it because we are making a lot of changes and a lot of changes because I have felt led and moved to move into this direction. So these series are still going to be providing those practical tips. I'm still going to be talking on my expertise in forest management, land ownership. I'm still going to be talking to women, especially women in the Southeast who are landowners. I'm still going to be doing all of that. But I'm taking a new spin on things. I am moving into faith-based scripture training, which if you've been following me for a while, then you already have seen some of these changes in how I've kind of been marketing and sharing and expressing and just teaching in my social media, as well as in our newsletters and different programs that we have recently launched. You've seen this change, but I haven't fully grasp it by the reins. I haven't fully embraced what this means for me, for my audience, for y'all. And in 2024, we are doing exactly that. We are going to be grabbing scripture-based, faith-based, whatever you want to call it, type trainings as a foundation for everything we do. This could be the perfect thing that connects you back to that old faith, perhaps new to new faith, to old beliefs or new beliefs, whatever it may be. This could be exactly what you need, just as it's exactly what I need to grow my faith deeper, to make me more aligned with my values of where I've been at. Now, a little bit about me, if you are completely new to me, I'm Danielle Atkins, CEO and owner, founder of Land and Ladies, where we have equipped and empowered women forest landowners across the Southeast for the past 4 years. Now, my women owner land ownership training specialty doesn't start 4 years ago. I've started developing women's programs specifically all the way to 2016. And I am a registered forester in the state of Georgia since 2018 and have been practicing forestry for a decade at this point. So I know my forest management. But what I am going to be new at is going to be intertwining scripture-based training into forest management. Now, why are we doing this? And it's simply because one, I feel called to. And I have learned to start being a lot more obedient the first time because no matter how much I kind of push back or I keep saying never, I would never do this, I would never do that. I don't know about you, but all my nevers have always come true as far back as I can look, pretty much probably to my childhood. Every single time I have said never, it has always come back and I've always done it, whether I wanted to or not. Kind of very similar to Jonah and the whale. He said he was never going to go to Nineveh, and God said, "Yes, you are, and I'm going to swallow you up with a whale just to teach you a lesson while I travel you over back to where you're supposed to be." I've had several of those whale eating experiences, and I don't particularly want to be swallowed up by a whale again, and so I am choosing to be more obedient. So what can you expect from me, from us in 2024? And we're going to have a good inspirational lesson in just a minute, and I just wanted to give you this type of background of where we've been, where we're at, where we're going, a little bit about me, because it is the new year and it is the perfect opportunity to kind of just reset, recalibrate, and start moving forward. Okay. So, what I'm going to be talking about today specifically is taking on the role that you don't feel equipped for. And this is so true when it comes to land ownership, especially for women, because when most of my clients, my audience, women I've talked to simply in passing as a registered forester, or even in the church hallways around, different community events, there seems to always be this underlining that we end up in roles and doing things and making decisions and having to take on some tasks that we didn't necessarily want to do. We didn't sign up for. We didn't agree that we would do this for that. We got placed into a particular position that ideally sets us up to be the perfect person to tackle whatever it needs to be. And it's never most true than when it comes to land ownership. You can ask most widows their stories of why they are trying to do these different things or how are they feeling. And they always comes down to they didn't expect to always or really ever kind of be the one in charge of their land management, of their land ownership, but they are now. Something happened to their husband, something happened to their spouse, their father, and they have been thrusted into these roles that they didn't necessarily want to do, but they were in the perfect position to take it on. And so what scripture, what person in the Bible specifically that has always been speaking to me for the last year, and you've seen me use this scripture and this story in a lot of different ventures and avenues and different talks that I've done, is Esther 4:14. All right. And I'm going to share a little bit of background about Esther in case you are unfamiliar with her, because she's not exactly the most popular character in the Bible. When you think of women in the Bible, you always hear about Ruth and Mary and the Proverbs 31 woman, or even Martha. But when it comes to especially Old Testaments, there are a ton of women, leaders, role models, lessons that we can gain that we don't always talk about. Now, Esther does have her own book, and so she is set apart a little differently, just like Ruth, where you're like, there's something a little bit about Esther that I didn't think I should know about, but I should know about. But she is a short book, and I feel like gets often overlooked. And honestly, I didn't really know that much about Esther except her very stereotypical scripture verse that even I use that you might see in passing a few times. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But Esther is essentially just 10 short chapters and a little bit of background of who she is and where she got. And that way, this whole thing will make a little bit of sense. All right. So you have to go back in time, and King Xerxes pretty much ruled all of the provinces, all of India, essentially. And he was a very, very great, mighty king that had one of the biggest vast lands in the area. And then his queen Vashti told him no at some point. And so he's like, well, we got to get rid of Queen Vashti. He had all of these wise counsels around him who really weren't that wise if you kind of read. And there was lots of questions where I'm just like, that was not a great decision. And you can even read between the lines where he even recognizes he made some poor decisions. But as king, whatever he says goes, and he could not even go back on his own word. So he's getting rid of Queen Vashti for not agreeing to come to his little party of his because it wasn't appropriate. And that's why she said no. She got thrown out of her queenship. So he needed to fill the role of who was going to be his queen. So his council is like, hey, why don't you just get all the women from all the different towns and you just pick one of them? And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. So he goes and grabs all these different women from these different provinces, brings them to the king's palace, and they are pretty much thrown into this weird mix of not really knowing what's going to happen to them. They're either going to become queen or they're going to be part of his harem, essentially. And Esther is one of these women who get kind of brought up. She's considered very, very beautiful, and she gets brought up into this palace. And this whole process is also taking a long time, at least a year, if not more. I don't remember the exact time frames, but it's very, very long. It's a lot longer than you would think of. Oh, it's just a couple months, so they get this quick decision. No, she's kind of put into taken from her home, this weird palace situation, being unknown of what's really going to happen to her and her future. Is she just going to be part of these hundreds of girls, or is she going to be ultimately, queen and second in authority, quote unquote? You can look at it in terms of royal positions in these provinces. So she gets thrown in there, and she has this uncle named Mordecai who's also looking out for her, and he's kind of hanging out and making sure that her situation is being protected, is on guard, trying to stay on top of her. He looks at her as a daughter figure, and she looks at him as a father figure. She ends up becoming queen. The king is enthralled by her beauty. She wins favor by everyone that meets her. It quite literally says. So she is just like definitely something to look at, all right, for sure. And I assume has great manners, holds herself with a ton of grace. And so she actually wins the position of being queen with King Xerxes. So she's now thrown into this role. Again, remembering this is not something she necessarily desired to do. She was taken, you could look at almost against her will, to the palace situation. The queen got kicked out against, nothing Esther could have done to kind of leverage her ability to gain a opportunity to be queen. She just happened to be beautiful in this small town, got taken to the palace, wins favor. She listens to everybody who's giving her advice on what she should do, how she should act. She has this natural grace, and you can read between the lines in all of these different verses of how God is always guiding her and kind of protecting her and giving her this shadow of grace is kind of how I look at it, that kind of really sets her apart from everybody else. So why does all of that little background matters? Well, when you look at your own everyday life, you can probably look in hindsight and see dots connect a lot more easily. You can look back and see a lot of God's grace and connections and direction. But in that moment, it may not have felt that way. You might have felt very overwhelmed and unsure of where to go. I know that's definitely true for my own situation, choosing my career path, especially. I mean, at one point, I was kind of in a position of trying to decide, was I going to work at Disney or was I going to pursue graduate school and a career in forestry? And it felt very overwhelming. And I really didn't know what to do. And I chose forestry, obviously, because that's where I'm at today. And I can clearly see how these things lined up. But maybe there's a lot of situations within your family, the just family dynamics that you can't necessarily control that have placed you into whatever role you're in. Maybe you're the oldest daughter. Maybe you are the wife of your husband who had a stroke or has a heart attack. Perhaps you're the daughter of what I would consider a family legacy. You are down to inherit thousands of acres, but you haven't really thought about any of that. You are in these different situations of family dynamics and opportunities that really aren't in your control. You can't control whose family you're born into. You can control who you marry, but you can't control necessarily what happens to your spouse during your marriage timeframe. You can't predict strokes or other diseases and illnesses or moves and job losses. You can't necessarily predict any of these things. These are all situations and circumstances that kind of get thrusted upon you. And that same is probably true when it comes to your land management. Now, Esther was placed into the queen's position. But back then, women still didn't have a lot of rights, a lot of roles. So even though she was queen, she wasn't necessarily like whispering in the king's ears all the time. Now, again, outside of her situation, very manipulative and terrible people were planning things to her culture, to her heritage, to all the Jews in India. Her uncle kind of makes this guy mad, and the guy's like, yeah, I'm going to kill all the Jews, and I'm specifically going to kill them all on December 13th. So Mordecai goes to Esther and is like, hey, you can stop this. You can win the king's favor and prevent any of this from happening. You can ask him to not allow this to happen. And she's like, listen, I know I'm the queen, but I can't exactly go into his palace, his corridors. I don't see him every day. She mentions that she hasn't seen him in like 30 days. And anyone isn't just allowed to go into the king's palace. You weren't just allowed to walk in and be like, hey, I got a question. Or like even in those cartoons where they have the nice line of people who come and ask a favor from the king, it doesn't necessarily work that way. You had to be invited into his glorious placement. And if you weren't, he quite literally could kill you. He could be like, you know what? You have disrespected me. You are dead. You are out of here. So she's a little worried, if I go and he doesn't find so much favor with me, I could quite literally die. And this is where the infamous 4:14 verse comes in. And I am going to start in verse 11, and this is chapter 4 of Esther. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. But 30 days has passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So those are verses 11 through 16. So we can see here she's obviously very nervous about, like, I can't just go, he could kill me. And Mordecai, full of faith, is just like, hey, if you don't do this, God's clearly going to pick somebody else. He's not going to allow all of his chosen people to be completely destroyed, but there's no necessarily saying that you won't make it. However, he also has enough wisdom and discernment to recognize that Esther wasn't just picked randomly from all the provinces with all of her beauty to be placed into this role. She's in a very unique position that not everybody gets. And it's, I think, really hard for us to kind of recognize our own unique positions because we don't always necessarily look at them as that type of ideal of possibilities. We got put into a position that we didn't necessarily ask for. We have this responsibility, again, that we didn't necessarily ask for, but we don't necessarily recognize all the opportunities that this position now allows us to be able to do. So when it comes to your own land ownership, perhaps you're feeling a little bit like Esther, like, hey, I never asked to be the person in charge. I never asked for this type of responsibility. I don't necessarily want to do this. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. For who knows that you have come to this position for such a time as this. You might be the perfect person. Maybe you have no background in land management and land ownership. Maybe you have never been a part of any of those decisions. Maybe perhaps that's not how you necessarily grew up or where you intended to go. But you clearly have been put into this position and have a unique opportunity that not everybody has. Esther's next line really speaks to me. What does she do? And this is definitely a practical tip that if you're placed in this position and very unsure of what to do next, the first thing you should definitely do is pray. Esther spends 3 days and nights fasting and praying. And more importantly, she actually asked for other people, for the other Jews to pray with her, to give her that wisdom, that confidence, that God's backing. And there is something very, very powerful about praying in group and having others pray for you to get that courage, to get that strength, to get that gumption is what I call a lot of times, to be able to actually follow through because it is very intimidating. It was very intimidating for her to be able to say, hey, I'm actually going to walk through those doors without being summoned. It can be very intimidating for you to say, I'm going to manage this land and walk out to the land. You may be like, well, Danielle, that's actually not that intimidating. It can be. It can be very intimidating to say, I'm going to go to that forestry association meeting where, no offense, but most of everybody is men. And they're not just men. They are men that have been working together for years and years and years, or talking and communicating and networking. And so there's something about this familiarity. It is intimidating to step through those doors by yourself, being an outsider, not knowing the terminology, not knowing what is and what isn't, the normal, not understanding a lot of what's going on. It is intimidating. And so you should pray for that courage, for that strength, for that confidence to say, I'm going to do this, and then walk through the doors. Now, what I also love about Esther, and I'm just going to touch on real quick before we kind of summarize this of what we can do for 2024 if you've been thrusted into this type of role, is chapter 5 starts with, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, He was pleased with her and held out the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. She prayed for it. But what I love and the lessons that I'm going to kind of talk on for 2024 for me, as well as for you, and especially when it comes to your land management, is that she followed through. Esther had a plan, and then she followed through on the actions she wanted to do. She said, pray for me and fast for 3 days. And on the third day, I will go. And if I perish, I perish. I will deal with the results, but this is what I'm doing. And on the third day, she put on those royal robes. She got her most confident outfit, and she did what she said she was going to do. So these are the tips I'm going to take into 2024. These are the lessons. This is what I am going to take from Esther, and aspire to help me become a better leader, to become a better person that has been placed into this royal position for such a time as this. I cannot say why I have been potentially chosen to do an intertwined scripture faiths training, to do an online consulting business geared towards women in the Southeast. I never had plans to do any of this. But over time, through a variety of events, some that hit globally, some that hit personally, this is where I'm at. And I am embracing this position because perhaps I have come to my royal position for such a time as this. And we'll see where this grows into. And so what I'm going to do and what I'm going to ask you to do for 2024 as well, to set us up, because it's the perfect opportunity, the perfect chance where we're all ready to reset, clear our plates, and start new habits, set some goals, figure out how we are going to make 2024 the biggest impact we can do. We are leaving the past behind, and we're looking at things with fresh eyes. Is first, I'm going to pray more, and I'm going to ask you to also pray for me on everything that I'm doing, to help pray for confidence and clarity, to make sure I will always be bringing you the right information, the right content, the right value that speaks to you, to your heart, where you're at, through faith-based inspiration, as well as those practical tips that you can actually take home and execute on your land or in your land ownership journey. Because I always want to make sure that it's not just so abstract that you're like, well, that's great, but I could never apply that. I don't understand how to even apply that into my daily life. So I am going to ask for you to pray that I will always have that clarity and that persistence to take what I feel called to create for you, to continue giving you value, as well as actionable, quick tips, practical steps that helps you make real transformational impact wherever you're at, whatever stage of ownership you're at. If you're a 30s mom with young kids trying to figure out how you need to manage your family land because something's happened and now you are in charge of it, or if you are in your 70s and perhaps you're a widow who's trying to figure out this online world, I pray that you will also help me and pray for me to continue giving you value no matter where you're located and what stage of land ownership you're in. And then I'm going to set goals. I'm going to set steps, and I'm going to follow through. On the third day, I am going to put on my royal robes, and we are going to move forward. So speaking of that, follow through, giving myself deadlines, giving you deadlines. These are the things we need to do. We need to pray for each other. We need to set deadlines, set goals, nothing too far out in the future that we can very easily talk ourselves out of. Because I do find it very remarkable that Esther came in like, well, this whole future date that Haman had picked was, I just say December. They had different months back then, but it was about 12 months away. She had almost a full year to kind of gain the confidence. She could have picked a lot of different time frames. She could have procrastinated it and postponed her actually talking to the king for a while. But what do we do when we tend to set a date too far off in the future? At least I know me. I tend to talk myself out of it. I either have procrastinated too long and I'm no longer prepared, despite the fact that I thought I gave myself plenty of time to prepare, that I actually didn't do anything. And then I talk myself out of doing what I thought I needed to do because it's no longer that sense of urgency of when I first planned on doing it. So I'm going to set some closer deadlines that give me more urgency to actually follow through on whatever it is. And so the first thing I've done for 2024 is I've set up a free masterclass, Landowner Foundations. Every year I used to teach the Women Landowner Academy, which was our 6-week landowner foundational course that I would walk you through the 6 foundational steps every landowner needs. Well, we've restructured in 2023 and we still have the academy and we still have our foundational steps within the academy that help walk you through that, as well as providing you all the other additional resources and community and exclusive training to walk you through and grow with you through your land ownership. But for 2024, I really wanted to kind of start off with a splash, still keep a little bit of what I'm used to with my old routines of, 2024, the new year, which I guess it was really 2021, 2022, 2023, but starting the new year with a reset in mind, getting back to the foundations, because of my dad ingrained one thing into me during softball years was that foundations and the basics were everything. If you can master the foundations and basics, you were one of the better players. You were the most well-rounded. Doing trick shots that aren't consistent didn't really matter in the critical moment as much as foundations and being able to hit the mark every single time. And I've taken that lesson through with me everything I do. Which is why for the new year, I hit the foundation so hard, which is why you hear me talk about a lot of these foundational components so much. Because I do believe if you have that solid basics, that solid underlining, that you continue to come back to make sure all of that's fine-tuned and aligned and you still got that on point, everything else falls into place so much easier. And so January 9th, 10th, 11th, taken from Esther, we are spending 3 days on a free masterclass going through the landowner foundations for you. And I'm going to be giving you 1 hour a day. We're going to go through these different foundational components, giving you these tips and tricks and practical things that you can do, as well as inspiration from Esther and other scriptures from the Old and New Testament that are going to provide us that further confirmation, that further backing to the importance of our land ownership, to the importance of us stepping up and making these intentional decisions. So I hope that you will join me there. I will see you live. If you want to figure out how to sign up, you can just go to www.landandladies.com/foundations. You can also shoot me an email, landandladies@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to send you the link. If you follow me on social medias, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, shoot me a message and I will also send you that link. Again, it's a completely free masterclass. I really hope to see you there, and that way we can all get reset for 2024. And with that, I will see y'all next week. Bye.